Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about cabins hidden deep in Appalachia. Every story is a warning. Some doors should stay shut. But before we begin, please consider subscribing. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends and family. I'd also love to hear where you're listening from. Thank you all for your support. It means a lot to me. Now let's start. It was early October. I'd been doing solo camping trips for a few years at that point, mostly as a way to clear my head. The more remote, the better. I liked the silence, the disconnection, just walking, until the world felt far away. That weekend, I went deep into the forest near Rowan County, Kentucky, about 8 miles off the main road. No trails, just a fading elk path and the remnants of some old logging roads that were more brush than road. At that point, I wasn't really aiming for anything. I wasn't following a route or trying to see a landmark. I just walked the ridge, keeping one eye on my compass, sort of zoning out. Then I hit a shallow creek bed, mostly dry, slick with moss. I stepped onto a flat rock, lost my balance, and went down hard, maybe a 10F drop onto shale, and packed leaves. My leg took most of the hit, hurt like hell, but nothing was broken. I sat there for a second, just swearing and catching my breath. That's when I saw the roof. Off to the side, through a thick patch of mountain laurel, I noticed the edge of a sloped tin roof, greenish rusted around the seams, just barely visible. It stopped me cold. There was no sign of a structure on my topo map. I hadn't seen any fences, no outbuildings, no signs of recent human activity, but there it was. I got up and moved toward it slowly, every step feeling more surreal. The cabin looked off. Old, yeah, but intact. No overgrowth strangling the siding, no vines climbing the porch. The forest had just stopped around it like it was giving the thing space. The structure itself was simple. Single-room stone chimney on one side, porch with 3 sagging steps. The bottom step had a long, clean split down the center. The front door wasn't on its hinges anymore. It leaned against the doorway like someone had taken it off carefully and set it aside. I called out, not because I thought anyone was inside, just force of habit. No response. I stepped in. Dust coated everything, thick, undisturbed, the kind that muffles sound when you move. But there was no smell, no mildew, no rot. It didn't even smell abandoned. It just didn't smell like anything. There was a narrow metal bed frame in one corner, busted springs poking through a rusted-out stove, a few old boxes with chipped enamel cups inside, and on the far wall, knife carvings. Dozens of them, all dates, just dates. 1953, 1961, 1977, 1989, each one clean, precise, evenly spaced in rows. No initials, no names, no context, just time recorded like a habit. And in the back left corner of the cabin there was a trap door. It was a square of old wood, maybe 3ft across, with a rusted iron ring sunk into the center. The boards around it were smooth, not worn down by weather, but polished, like it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. I crouched beside it and put my hand on the ring. It was ice cold, not cool, not shaded wood cold. I mean freezing metal left in the snow, cold. I flinched and pulled my hand back fast. Then came the sound. Something moved beneath me, a long, dragging sound, slow, heavy, like something being pulled across packed dirt. Then silence. I stood there frozen, telling myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon, maybe roots shifting, but I didn't believe it. Still, I left, didn't open the trap door. Just marked the location on my GPS and backed out of the cabin like something might change its mind about letting me leave. 3 weeks later, I returned. I brought my friend Connor. He wasn't the superstitious type. If you showed him a ghost, he'd try to debunk it before you could blink. But when I told him what I'd seen, really told him, he didn't laugh. He just said, "Let's go see it." We hiked in early. Same route. Felt longer this time. My stomach tightened the closer we got to the creek bed. I used some didn't say anything, just pointed through the trees, when I saw that same sliver of roof. The cabin hadn't changed, still tucked quietly into the clearing, still untouched. But something was different. The front door, last time it was leaning off to the side, was now upright, balanced perfectly in the frame, not reattached, just standing there like someone had gently set it back. Connor laughed, said it was probably wind, or a deer bumping it. I didn't answer. We stepped inside, flashlights sweeping across the room. Everything was where I remembered it. Stove bed boxes, but now there was a new carving on the wall, a fresh date, not one of the old ones I'd seen before. This one was recent, the exact day we were there. Clean cut, no dust in the groove. It hadn't been there the last time. Connor said, "Maybe I missed it." I didn't argue, but I knew. We went straight to the trap door, used the crowbar to pry it open. The sound it made wasn't just hinges. There was a deeper groan like it came from further down. The opening revealed stone steps, slick with moss, leading underground. We descended. The space was small, maybe 10 ft square, clay walls, old lumber supports, dead silent. In the center of the room sat a wooden chair, handmade tallback, facing the stairs. I stepped off the last stair. Everything changed. The temperature didn't drop. It flattened, like the cold was coming from inside my chest, not the air. The silence was heavy. Not just quiet, but wrong, like sound couldn't settle. The dirt underfoot felt dry, but unstable, like it didn't want me there. Connor walked up beside the chair, gave it a tap with his boot. It creaked. He smirked. I turned away just for a second to check the far wall with my flashlight. Another date. That same day again, fresh as if someone had just carved it. I turned back to say something to Connor. He was gone. The chair was empty. No sound, no footsteps, just gone. I froze, staring at the space where he'd been. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I ran back up the stairs, Burson, and out the door, circled the clearing, yelling his name. Nothing. No movement, no echo. The forest didn't even feel like it was listening. Then, from beneath my feet, I heard the dragging sound again, slower this time. I forced myself back inside, down the stairs. The chair was tipped over now, still empty. Nothing else had changed. I screamed for him over and over. I don't even remember stopping. Eventually I left. I left everything. Packs, flashlight, crowbar, GPS. I ran until I hit the gravel forest road, flagged down a passing truck. The driver took one look at me and let me in. I told the police. They brought in search teams. Rangers hiked out with dogs. They found the cabin, but no trapdoor, just a solid wooden floor. No stairs, no opening, nothing to explain anything. I was 28 when it happened. Driving alone through a part of North Carolina I barely knew, trying to make it to a family thing before nightfall. I'd taken a detour to avoid traffic. One of those scenic back routes you regret the second you realize there's no gas station for 50 miles from me and your GPS signal's been dead for half an hour. Then the engine didn't stall. It just stopped like a switch flipped. 1 second I was humming to some scratchy old classic rock station, and the next the whole car went dark. Radio gone. Dashboard gone. Headlights too. It was dead silent. No clicks, no warning lights, no fade out. Just gone. The steering wheel locked up a bit stiff under my hands, and the car coasted in total silence until it gently rolled to a stop on the shoulder. I remember just sitting there for a second, staring ahead like maybe everything would blink back on if I waited long enough. Spoiler, it didn't. I tried the ignition. The key turned, but it felt hollow. No resistance, no engine noise, just this weird damp glide like turning a spoon in thick oatmeal. Outside, the sun was low enough to smear everything in orange, but not quite gone. Early November, getting dark, fast cold enough to make you zip your jacket without thinking about it. No traffic, not even a whisper of another car, just an endless ribbon of cracked black tops slicing through the Appalachian. I checked my phone. No signal, not even one of those false phantom bars you sometimes get when your phone is just trying to make you feel better. So I got out, more from habit than anything. I left the hazards on, though. With no juice, they weren't doing much besides blinking faintly. The air felt off. Not cold, not strange, just kind of held like the whole place was waiting for something. I walked a little up the shoulder, holding my phone in the air like an idiot, hoping maybe I'd catch a signal up the slope. Nothing, just the distant hum of trees. I turned to go back, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just another break in the brush, but there was a narrow cut in the trees barely wide enough to squeeze through, and something about it stuck with me, like it had been used recently, but not by anything natural. The way some of the lower branches were snapped looked too clean deliberate. And through that opening, maybe 100 yards out, I caught a glimpse of a roof. Wooden slanted, just the edge of it tucked behind the trees. Now a smarter version of me probably would have turned around and stayed with the car. But I figured, look, maybe it was a cabin, a hunting shack, something. Anything was better than freezing my ass off on the side of the road waiting for a tow truck that might never come. So I zipped up, slung my bag over my shoulder, and stepped through the break in the trees. The path wasn't much, mostly a mat of old pine needles, soggy leaves, and the occasional root trying to trip me. The trees leaned in, close, tall, and thick, muffling everything. As I walked, I kept expecting to see more of the cabin, for the angle to change, for it to get clearer. But it didn't. That roof line, it stayed exactly the same. No matter how far I went, it always looked like it was just a little farther ahead. Same slant, same bit of overhang, like the cabin was walking away from me in slow motion. Still, I pushed on. Eventually, I stepped into a clearing, and there it was. It wasn't ruined. It wasn't well kept either. It just felt wrong. Not in a horror movie way, but in that subtle way your gut tightens when something isn't quite how it's supposed to be. A-frame roof stone chimney. The windows were empty, just open frames with no glass, but nothing shattered or broken. The front porch had a soft dip in the middle, like it had been sagging slowly for years. I climbed the steps and knocked once, then again. No answer, no sounds inside, not even birds, just that flat open silence that presses in when you're somewhere you shouldn't be. I waited for a few seconds, then tried the knob. It turned easily. The door opened on its own, just eased inward, like it had been sitting loose all day. Inside smelled like dust and stillness, not rot, just dry and old. The hearth was packed with cold ash. A big chair faced it, covered with a wool blanket that looked like someone had just stood up from it. In the corner there was a table, one place setting a fork, a ceramic plate, and this mug carved from wood. Everything else was still, dead still. I called out, "Hello, nothing." So like a complete idiot, I stepped inside. The floor creaked under my boots, but only barely. No lights, no fixtures, just a few candles melted into stone holders along the walls. I eased past the hearth and peeked into the kitchen. Old school, primitive. A hand-pee pump sink, a few rusted tin cans, and a dry basin stained with a ring of brown that looked like it had been there since the Cold War. There was a hallway past it, so I kept going. I don't know why I didn't leave then. Maybe I was still convincing myself this was just someone's cabin, and they'd come back any minute. The bedroom door was already open. The bed didn't have sheets, just a sunken mattress and a folded cloth at the foot. There wasn't much else except for one photo on the wall, nailed at eye level. It was old, black and white. A family, 2 parents, 3 kids, everyone dressed like they were headed to church in the 1930s. But their faces had been scratched out, not blurred, not torn, cut deep slashes, aggressive, violent. You could see gouges in the wood behind the frame where someone had really gone at it. I must have stared at it too long, because that's when I heard the footsteps, soft, deliberate above me. I.F. rose. There hadn't been any staircase, I was sure of that. But the sound someone was moving upstairs. Slowly, carefully, I stepped back into the hallway, trying not to breathe. And then I noticed something I'd missed. Behind the hearth in the main room, there was this archway covered by a curtain made of old wooden beads. I don't know how I didn't see it before. It was just there, like it had grown from the wall itself. The beads swayed gently, There was no wind. I turned toward the door, and that's when I saw him just standing inside the cabin like he'd always been there. Not tall, not hulking, just solid, wide-brimmed hat, long, dark coat. His head was tilted slightly forward, arms at his sides. His face was wrapped in stitched leather, tight wrong. It pulled across his nose and mouth and down under his jaw, held together with heavy, uneven seams, like someone had sewn it while blindfolded. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just raised one arm and pointed at the table, the place setting. He wanted me to sit. I didn't move. He stepped forward silent. The boards didn't creak. His feet pressed into the wood like it didn't matter, like he was weightless. He pointed again. I sat. Not because I wanted to. I just didn't know what else to do. My whole body felt locked up. My hands stayed in my lap. I kept glancing at him from the corner of my eye, waiting for I don't even know what. Then slowly he turned and walked through the bead curtain behind the hearth. I heard a door open, then nothing. I stayed frozen in that chair for what felt like an hour. The plate in front of me was empty, but there were crumbs on the table, and the fork had a smear of something across its tine. Someone had eaten, not long ago. Eventually I stood. My legs shook. I walked slowly to the front door, watching the curtain the whole time. I reached out for the knob, and I heard it. Not a voice, not a sound. It hit me like a memory I didn't know I had. One word, stay. That's when I ran. The door flung open, and I sprinted out across the clearing, back through the path that suddenly felt way shorter than it had on the way in. I slipped on the pine needles. Branches clawed at me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Not until I saw my car still there, still dead. But I climbed up the bend, and finally my phone buzzed. One shaky bar. Enough. I called a tow truck. The guy who came barely said a word. Mid-50s. I told him about the trail. He stared out into the trees for a second, then said flatly, "Ain't no trail over there." I told him I saw a cabin. He didn't blink, just muttered, "That place burns itself down every time someone finds it." I didn't talk about it again. My grandmother passed away the winter before, and the cabin went to me in the will. I didn't ask for it, and no one else in the family wanted it. Just this little weather-beaten cabin tucked against the Appalachian foothills. Nothing around it for miles except trees and silence. The roof sagged. The porch was warped. The chimney never really stopped smoking even when there wasn't a fire going. She'd lived up there by herself for decades, totally off-grid. No electricity, no plumbing, not even a landline. You couldn't get a phone signal unless you climbed about halfway up the nearest ridge. No road signs, no GPS pin. If you didn't already know where it was, you wouldn't find it. We used to visit when I was a kid, only for holidays, Christmas sometimes, Easter. She never came to us, never left the mountain really. She didn't own a car, never wrote letters. She just stayed up there like some part of her belonged to the hills. I remember her always looking out the windows. She had this wiry frame and these intense pale eyes, like she was constantly waiting for something. Her stories never made much sense, but they had this unsettling rhythm to them, like she believed every word. She'd say things like, "Stay near the fire after sunset," or "Never sleep facing the window." Stuff that sounded like folklore, but she said it too seriously for it to feel quaint. Anyway, after she died, I felt like someone should at least go up and check on the place, sort through her things box up what was worth keeping. I figured I'd be there a week, tops clean it out, maybe list it for sale if it wasn't falling apart. I brought enough food and water for 7 days, a few books to stay sane, and one of those big plastic battery lanterns, since I knew the power situation was non-existent. I got there late on a Sunday, not full dark yet, but the sun was definitely on its way out. The air up there fell thinner than I remembered, like breathing required more effort. The cabin looked smaller too, somehow, like it had shrunk a little without her in it, and the woods around it. I don't know. I don't remember them being so dense. The trees felt closer, like they'd been inching in for years. The porch groaned when I stepped on it. I had to shoulder the door open because the wood had swollen from years of humidity. Inside it was like nothing had changed. Same heavy curtains, same creaky wood stove. The smell hit me immediately. Cedar dust, something faintly musty, like old books left in a basement. The first few days were fine, mostly boring. I kept myself busy, cleared out the pantry, emptied dresser drawers, folded linens that hadn't been touched in years. There was a rhythm to it. Wake up, make coffee on the propane stove, work until sunset, read until I fell asleep. The silence was the only thing that got to me. It wasn't peaceful. It was dead silence. No birdsong, no insects, just nothing. Like sound didn't want to hang around too long. There was one thing I kept avoiding: the shed. It sat maybe 30, 40 ft behind the cabin, half concealed under a mess of brambles and vines. I'd seen it 100 times as a kid, but I'd never been inside. It was always locked. The kind of lock that looks like it's been rusted shut for a century. When I asked her about it once, I couldn't have been older than 10, and I remember exactly what she said. "That's not for guests." She didn't say it in a creepy way. She said it like she was talking about a room she didn't clean anymore, but I never forgot it. By the 4th day, I'd run out of other things to clean or organize, so I grabbed a crowbar and made my way out there. The padlock gave after a little effort, and the door gave way with a shudder that sent dried leaves scattering inside. It smelled awful damp, like wet cardboard and something rotting. A couple mice had made nests in the insulation. Some of the shelves had collapsed entirely. I stepped over a broken shovel, a pile of moth-eaten coats, and a half-crushed box of old tools. Toward the back was a wooden cabinet, kind of like a small arm wire. It had a sliding latch, simple, but still locked. I opened it and found notebooks, dozens of them. All identical plain brown covers, unmarked, same size, no titles, no labels. I grabbed a few and took them back to the cabin. That night I sat at the kitchen table with a flashlight and started flipping through them. They weren't journals, not in the usual sense. No full sentences, no personal notes. Each entry was numbered and began with a short clipped line. Most were just a sentence two at most. Entry 328. It was looking through the windows again. Entry 334. It knows I'm awake. Entry 341. It stayed at the tree line all night. Entry 352. I didn't light the stove. It still came. No names, no context, just it over and over again. I kept reading, hoping for something more specific, but it never came. The entries didn't even follow a clear timeline. It felt like she'd been cataloging sightings or tracking patterns, like someone trying to remember the rules of a game they didn't want to play. That night, I left the notebooks on the table and tried to focus on something else. I picked up a book, got through a few pages, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows. The corners of the room felt closer, like the walls had shifted while I wasn't looking. I passed out on the couch with my boots still on. Sometime after 2:00 a.m., I woke up dry-mouthed and disoriented. I went into the kitchen to get water and noticed the curtain above the sink had pulled back just a little. Maybe the breeze had done it. Maybe I brushed it earlier without realizing. But through that gap, I saw something. At the edge of the trees, something was standing, tall, too tall, at least 6, and 1-2 ft, maybe more. It wasn't shaped right. Too thin, too straight, like someone had stretched out a human silhouette and forgotten to add the details. No clothes, no visible features, just standing there. I stared, didn't move, didn't blink. My brain tried to label it. Tree branch, maybe a trick of the moonlight, but nothing fit. I reached out and flipped the porch light on. Gone. I didn't sleep after that. Just sat behind the kitchen island with my flashlight aimed at the door. Every muscle tensed, like I was waiting for someone to kick it open. When the sun came up, I forced myself to go outside. I had to know if I'd imagined it. Where it had been standing, the grass was pressed flat. 2 long grooves side by side, like something had dragged stilts through the yard. No prints, no debris, just those marks leading from the woods to within 10 ft of the porch. Then they stopped or turned back. I couldn't tell. I picked up the notebooks, took them back to the shed, and locked the door behind me. Told myself it was a deer. Told myself I'd dreamed it, that the grooves were from tires or fallen branches. I repeated that for hours. But that night I didn't turn the lights off. I stayed wrapped in a blanket on the couch, eyes glued to the window, every sound amplified. Around 3 Hornber in the morning I heard the back door click. Just once, not a bang, not even a creak, just a quiet, deliberate click like someone trying the handle gently. I waited, listened. Then the screen door shifted. One long creak. And a second later something tapped the kitchen window. 3 times, soft, precise. I didn't look. I slid down off the couch and stayed on the floor until the morning light crept in under the doorframe. At dawn, I packed, threw what I could into a bag. Didn't even check if I left anything behind. I just wanted out. I got the truck started and was about to climb in when I noticed something stuck to the porch screen. It was a folded piece of paper. Looked like it had been placed there, carefully tucked behind the mesh. It was one of the notebook pages. Entry 443. You should not have stayed alone. I don't remember the drive back. It's all a blur. Trees turns long stretches of road where I kept checking the rearview mirror like I expected to see something sprinting behind me. That winter had been brutal, just a quiet burnout that finally reached critical mass. I'd been working in this narrow little office with no windows, surrounded by buzzing fluorescent lights and people who talked in low voices about VPN outages and firmware updates like it meant something deep. One day I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd stood outside during daylight, so I left. I didn't have some grand plan, just this growing urge to shake the numbness off. I wanted to feel discomfort, not the soul-grinding kind, but the physical, raw sort, the kind that lets you know you're still alive. That's where the Appalachian Trail idea came from. I wasn't doing it to go off-grid or find inner peace or any of that. It was more like I needed to prove something to myself, that I could carry everything I needed, that I could be stripped down to just my body, my will, and the land. I started from Georgia heading north. The early season crowd was full of eager hikers sharing snacks, posting daily mileage, and comparing gear setups. They were nice people, honestly, but I didn't care about community. The more I walked, the more I craved the quiet. I started skipping shelters, choosing isolated campsites deep off the trail, and eventually stopped even checking in with other hikers. Somewhere along the way, I stopped following the blazes entirely. I'd see old fire roads, faint deer tracks, narrow game trails that veered off into nothing, and I'd follow them. I told myself that the real test was off the grid, away from the safety of beaten paths and log books. I was somewhere in the Tennessee-North Carolina borderlands when things shifted. Late May by then, deep forest miles from any town. You know the kind of woods where even the air feels like it's pressing against you, like the place isn't exactly welcoming you, just tolerating your presence. That day started like most oatmeal blisters tree roots, but then around midday, the light changed. It was sudden, not gradual like normal cloud cover rolling in. One moment I was squinting up through gaps in the canopy at a bright sunny sky. The next it was like someone laid a thick gray tarp over everything. Not fog, not rain, just flat dim light, heavy and directionless. I paused and pulled out my GPS. It started jittering, jumping between coordinates that didn't make sense. I checked my compass. No matter which way I turned, it spun slowly, almost lazily, like it was drunk. I took out my physical map and tried to match my surroundings, but nothing fit. Every ridge and bend felt subtly wrong, like the landscape had shifted by just a few degrees overnight. Still, I didn't panic. I've been off trail plenty of times. I knew how to get my bearings. I found what looked like a faint game path sloping northward and followed it, figuring it would lead to some old ranger access road or cross a marked trail eventually. But as I kept walking, the forest thickened in a way I didn't like. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just this thick silence that felt like standing in an unplugged room full of padded walls. That's when I saw it. Tucked back into a shallow hollow, nearly swallowed by brush and ivy, a cabin just sitting there, low square, built from wide logs that looked like they hadn't been treated or painted in decades. It didn't look abandoned, just out of time. No number on the door, no signs, just a thick wooden latch, no handle, no glass in the windows either. Just dark, empty holes. I called out. Nothing. I knocked. Still nothing. Still. I told myself I'd just take a peek. Maybe it was an old ranger station or a hunter's retreat. I wasn't planning to stay just to look. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. You know that sensation when you step into a room and immediately know something's off, like your body pet picks up on it before your brain does. There was no furniture, no dust either, just this sharp absence like the place had been wiped clean recently. The ceiling beams were lined with these things, bundles of twigs and bones tied together with dark, cracked twine. Some had bits of feather, some had what looked like animal teeth. A few of those teeth, though they were way too big flat and yellow human, or close enough to make me queasy. They hung low and swung slightly, even though the air was completely still. The floor had deep scratches, spiraling inward from all directions, toward a dark patch in the middle. The wood there looked soaked, stained over time, with something dark and uneven. It felt like it had a texture just by looking at it, like something had seeped in again and again. And right then this weird pull hit me. Not physical. It didn't drag me forward or anything. It was more psychological, like that tiny, reckless voice in your head that dares you to jump from a high ledge just to see what would happen. I backed out immediately, pulse hammering in my throat. The forest had gone even quieter. It wasn't just the silence. It was the feeling that something was listening. Then I noticed the movement. Figures not close, maybe 50 feet away, shifting between the trees. Not walking, not getting closer, just watching. I froze. One of them stepped into full view. Tall, way too tall, but slumped over in this unnatural, Broken L-looking posture. Its limbs were long and thin, like they'd been stretched out. Its skin looked wet, translucent, almost like peeled bark. Its arms hung past its knees. Where its face should have been were two wide black pits. No reflection, no depth, just void. Then another appeared, and another, each one jerking forward in these halting, insectal-like bursts. No sound, no breathing. They weren't coming for me. They were fixated on the cabin. One of them entered it, brushing past me without a glance. I backed up slowly, keeping low, trying not to snap a twig or disturb a leaf. They didn't react not to. Owe me only to the building. Then I noticed what they were doing. Around the cabin they were laying down a pattern. Stones, small bone sticks, arranged with unsettling precision into a wide ring, not random symmetrical rehearsed like they'd done this before. The one inside the cabin was moving along the walls, pausing at the places where the floor was most scarred. Then the sound began. A high-pitched mechanical wail, like metal screaming against itself, came from inside. The others outside didn't open their mouths, but the sound began pouring out of them too. A vibrating bone-deep tone that hit me in the teeth. It made my skin crawl. My legs buckled and I collapsed beside my pack. My flashlight spilled out. And then it got worse. The already dim light vanished completely. It was like someone flipped a cosmic switch. No moon, no stars, no outlines, just nothing. And then the voices came. Not theirs, mine. My brother's voice drawn out and warbled. Sir, my grandmother's voice dead 5 years now. Where are you? Why did you leave? Then my own voice, low and coaxing. Come inside. It's safe. They weren't speaking to me. They were unraveling me, peeling something away, trying to replace what was real. I reached blindly for the flashlight, found it, and flicked it on. The beam hit the clearing, and the screaming changed. It became violent and animalistic, like something old and wounded and furious. The one closest to me dropped convulsing smoke, rising off its skin. The others shrieked and recoiled, arms flailing over their face pits. The one inside the cabin exploded through the wall, collapsing in a spasming mess of limbs. The light didn't just hurt them, it destroyed them. I turned it to full power and ran. They moved aside. One reached for me, but its arm never crossed into the beam. It recoiled like the light was acid. I ran until my legs failed, then crawled. My flashlight flickered once, and I nearly threw up from panic, but it held. Hours later, I found a stream, followed it until I hit a gravel road that led to a ranger station near a town called Hot Springs. I must have looked like hell, mud-caked, bleeding, barely coherent. I told them I got lost. They didn't ask more. Before I left, I saw a supply shelf. Flashlight same make as mine. I picked one up and flipped it over. Printed on the back, new UV mode. The place was so deep in the Appalachian woods that the GPS gave up before we even left paved roads. By the time we arrived, we were driving over gravel, then dirt, then nothing but ruts carved through the hill. I found the listing online, unplugged escape with wilderness access. I skimmed it, saw 3 nights cheap enough, and thought, yes, no signal, no distractions, just silence. That was exactly what I needed before senior year swallowed me again. We were 3 of us, me, Declan, and Milo. Declan's the kind of guy who paces in place, always needs to be moving, even when we're just watching TV. Milo, in contrast, doesn't wake up before noon, even when the sun's blasting through the curtains. Different rhythms. No spiritual quest. No friendship bracelet moments. We just needed a break. Wood smoke, maybe a fire pit, and the freedom of having no one to answer to for a couple of days. We met the owner at the bottom of a hill that looked like it had washed out during the last flood. He didn't give us directions, just coordinates. Parked in an old Silverado window down with country music drifting out. He handed me a single brass key on a weathered leather loop, nodded once, and drove off. That was it. The cabin was aged. Dark cedar boards, a wraparound porch that sagged and moaned. Inside 2 small bedrooms with squeaky beds, a sink that looked like it had seen decades of rust, pantry with half-empty cans of soup, and mismatched mugs lined up as if they'd never been washed at the same time. Solar panels on the roof drooped slightly, and if you got too close you could hear a low, hesitant buzz, like an appliance trying to decide if it even wanted to work. Then there was that narrow trail behind the cabin. Just a thinned-out patch in the forest that curved into darkness. First night, we sat on the porch until past midnight, huddled around the fire pit. The woods were so quiet, it felt like the forest was holding its breath. No insects, no distant engines, just the pop, pop of burning logs and the hiss of beer cans being opened. I remember how odd but comforting it felt to hear nothing. My skin relaxed. My thoughts slowed. I think that's when I knew I'd needed to come here. Second night came with a kind of restlessness. The trail behind the cabin began nagging at me. I couldn't let it lie. We grabbed Milo's half-dead flashlight light, stronger on hope than lumens, and headed out. The path tightened quickly. Roots twisted underfoot. Branches brushed our chests and caught in our hair. Walking demanded concentration, more than I expected. After about a kilometer, we emerged into a clearing. It was oddly perfect, round and clean with grass that looked like it had been flattened gently. No signs of disturbance. At the edge, a second path, flattened grass, scattered gravel. Not really a trail, but definitely something. Declan checked his offline map. Might loop around the service road, he said. A practical voice in the woods. We followed. A few minutes later, I saw movement. Low in the tree-ine. Something flicked through brush. My pulse ticked up. It looked like a deer or coyote at first, but it unfolded itself upright, way too smooth for an animal. Not a quick stand-up, just uncurling, Milo whispered. Declan let out his trademark awkward laugh, like a hiccup. Probably another hiker, he said. But somewhere in his tone, I heard doubt. He was talking himself into it. That's when we spotted the perch. A wooden hunting stand tucked in old as the cabin, or older, with rusted nails and moss, climbing the ladder like vines. Declan climbed up by reflex. I took my time. Milo paced below with hands shoved deep in the pockets of his hoodie. From the top, the view opened up, the hills, the moonlit meadow woods stretching into nothing. And in the distance, something moved, a pulse of white light not swinging or swaying, but shooting. It flicked forward beams steady fast, recklessly fast. It skipped through trees like gravity didn't apply. "There's no trail down there," I said. No one answered. We just stared. Then Declan cupped his hands and yelled, "Hey, buddy!" trying to sound casual like he didn't want to throw a tantrum in the dark. The light stopped suspended mid-motion. It tilted upward, stopped dead on us, just locked on like a camera beam without a lens. We froze. Then it blinked off. No fade, no slow dim. Just gone like someone slammed a light switch. We climbed down. Milo was already heading back toward the cabin, head turned over his shoulder. The forest felt narrower, each tree somehow closer. Leaves and twigs snapped, crunching louder than they should. My throat tightened. Behind us, something moved. Nothing clear, just a shape drifting pace matching ours. No click of flashlight chase, no branch snap, just that steady presence. We pushed through trees and undergrowth faster. The cabin came into view finally. Lights off, porch empty. We locked doors. Front side, that old back door that never closed tight. Inside was dark and cold. We stayed in the main room, warmed ourselves on the cheap beer, and sat staring at the windows, silently scanning for movement. No one tried to lighten the mood. No searches for rational explanations. Nobody said, maybe it was a hunter. Because no one sprints headlamp off through dense woods. No one stops on command in midair. No one follows three strangers back deep into the forest without leaving something behind. We left at dawn. I dropped the key in the lockbox without looking back. We didn't check phones till we'd driven an hour, and the signal finally caught up. We've never talked about what happened. My uncle owns this little off-grid cabin way out in the Appalachian foothills, somewhere near the Tennessee-North Carolina border, tucked off a gravel road that doesn't even have a name. He mostly uses it during hunting season, but that summer, in early July, he offered to let me borrow it for a week. No adults, no supervision, just me and two of my friends way out in the middle of nowhere. I guess he figured it would build character or whatever. Honestly, we thought it sounded like the best idea ever. We weren't trying to spook ourselves. It wasn't that kind of trip. We just wanted a break from the noise, you know? No phones, no Wi-Fi, no one checking up on us. It felt like a reset button. The place itself pretty basic. The cabin sits low in a little dip between the trees. It's got no running water, just a crank pump about 10 FT off the back porch. Electricity comes from an old propane generator that's more temperamental than useful. The first night we tried to run it and got maybe an hour of light before it sputtered out, and we had to finish setting up in the dark with flashlights. There's no plumbing either, just a crooked outhouse 50 paces into the trees. There's a hand-crank radio that gets one AM station if you stand in exactly the right spot, and a wood stove that fills the whole cabin with smoke unless you open the flue just right. Took us about 2 days to figure that out. After the first night, everything we owned smelled like a barbecue pit. Before we left, my uncle gave me these 3 simple rules. Keep the fire pit covered when you're not using it. Don't leave food out unless you want raccoons or worse digging through your stuff, and don't wander around at night. Bears, he said, then added under his breath, and worse things if you believe in that sort of thing. He said it with a kind of half smile, like he was kidding, but also like he wasn't. Anyway, and it was me, Corey, and Jules. Corey was one of those guys who laughed before his jokes landed. Big energy, loud voice, always cracking wise about something. He had a way of making you feel like nothing could touch you when he was around. Jules was different, quieter, more careful, thoughtful. He was the one who actually read the instructions on the water filter, check-sacked the trail markers, and brought a spare flashlight, even though we all made fun of him for overpacking. First night we made a fire behind the cabin. We brought some hot dogs and canned chili, sat around roasting food and making each other laugh. The woods felt calm. The sky was so clear it looked fake. It wasn't even cold, just that perfect summer evening air. We started playing this game, daring each other to share the weirdest thing we'd ever seen. It wasn't serious, just teen stuff. I was mid-sentence talking about something dumb I saw online when Jules just stopped. His whole face changed. He didn't blink, just stared ahead into the woods and said, calm as anything. To the east, in the pines, he waits alone. Go while the moon's still low. Then he blinked, looked around, and asked why we were all staring at him like he'd grown a second head. Corey burst out laughing. Okay, creepy solid bit. But Jules looked off confused, like he genuinely didn't know what we were talking about. He swore he didn't remember saying anything, said he'd zoned out for a second, and came back to find us frozen like statues. That got under my skin a little. Not in a we're haunted kind of way, just weird. I didn't sleep all that well that night. Next morning I got curious. I remembered what he said to the east. So I dug around in the cabin supply box until I found this beat-up old compass. East led down a narrow game trail, winding between two moss-covered ridges lined with thick pines. The air changed as I walked. It wasn't that the temperature dropped. It just felt held like the trees were waiting. About a half-mile in, I found this clearing I didn't expect. In the middle was this long, low mound like a burial site, but older, covered in vines and moss, and all tangled up in itself. At the far end was a wooden post, blackened and split. Deep vertical cuts ran down its face, like someone had tried to carve something out or in and given up halfway. It looked forgotten, like it was meant to be. I didn't stay long. That night back at the cabin, I told them about the clearing. I didn't even finish the description before Jules went pale, like all the blood had dropped out of him at once. He said quietly that he'd seen that place before in a dream 2 nights before we left for the trip. Same mound, same post, same trees to the east. He hadn't mentioned it because he figured it was just his brain doing weird dream things. But now it didn't feel like a coincidence. We stayed inside that night, kept the stove going, huddled around a couple of flashlights. No one brought up the thing Jules said by the fire. Then, the next night, it happened again. We were playing cards, just trying to act normal, when Corey suddenly chuckled at something, then got this faraway look, stood up real slow, and said, in this strange flat tone, "Past the roots beneath the stone, he moves." Then he blinked, looked around, and sat down like nothing had happened. Jules and I looked at each other. We didn't say anything. We didn't have to. We both knew what it meant. The next morning things were different. The side of the cabin was scratched. Deep, deliberate gouges that ran down the wall like something massive had dragged claws across it. 5 marks. Our firewood pile was knocked sideways like someone or something had stomped through it. One of our coolers was missing. We found it about 20 yards into the woods, torn open and half buried under leaves. None of us said a word during breakfast. Later that day, I talked Corey into going back to the clearing with me. Jules wouldn't come. Said the air was wrong. The trail felt heavier, like it was pushing back. When we finally made it to the clearing, we both just stopped. The mound had been torn open. Something had ripped through it from the inside. The post was snapped in 2, lying face down in the dirt. The earth looked torn and raw, like whatever was under there had clawed its way out. Corey didn't speak until we were halfway back. Then he muttered, "This feels like a warning." That night we bolted the cabin door. It wasn't much, just a sliding wooden bar, but it was all we had. Jules rigged a line of soda cans and fishing line across the windows to act as an alarm. We left the stove burning low and kept our boots on. At 3 a.m. we heard the tapping. Not on the door, on the glass. 1 tap pause, then another. Then came the knocking. 3 slow thuds on the wall beside our bunks. Then something moved across the roof. Heavy, deliberate. We could hear the weight in the rafters, feel the structure groan with every step. Jules whispered, "He's coming because you looked. He sees you now." But his voice, it wasn't his voice. Corey grabbed the hatchet. I had my uncle's old hunting knife. Jules didn't move, just curled up on the couch and stared. Then something slammed into the door. The whole frame shook, but that was it. No second hit, just silence. We stood there for what felt like hours waiting. Morning finally came. Outside we found hoofprints, big ones too big for a horse. They circled the cabin twice, then vanished into the woods. We didn't talk, just packed, covered the fire pit, hiked out fast. My uncle was waiting where he'd dropped us off. None of us said a word on the drive home. After that, everything sort of fell apart. Jules moved out of state, changed his number. Corey deleted all his accounts and stopped answering texts. Lawson T. I heard he dropped out. My uncle offered to let me use the cabin again the next summer. I told him no. Didn't give a reason. Music. I'd taken a couple weeks off work. I'd been working long hours at the firm, skipping weekends, answering emails at midnight like it was normal. One day I just kind of stopped. I sat at my desk staring at a spreadsheet and realized I couldn't remember how I got to the office that morning. That's when I knew I needed out, at least for a little while. I grew up in Kentucky, and the mountains always had this strange comfort to them. Not like some poetic escape or anything. It's just when you grow up surrounded by that kind of quiet, it never really leaves you. My grandfather used to hike all over the Appalachian. After he passed, I ended up with this old topographic map he'd drawn on over the years. It had these faded notations in pencil, little symbols and initials next to regial lines and fire roads that didn't even exist on modern maps anymore. One trail in particular caught my eye. It was just a faint line leading up into a ridge I didn't recognize. No label, no name, just a thin arc curling away from a barely visible road. I checked satellite images, no structures, no signs of recent use. That was exactly what I wanted. I packed light day supplies mostly, enough food and water for maybe 8 hours, plus my phone camera and a first aid kit. I headed out early that morning, drove about 2 hours east, parked off the shoulder of an old access road and started hiking. The trail wasn't maintained, which I expected. It barely existed, more like a memory of a trail than anything current. But that didn't bother me. I liked having to watch my step, liked the solitude. The woods out there are dense, pines so tall and close together they block out most of the light. No wind, just the occasional snap of a twig underfoot or the quiet rustle of something small moving off trail. I passed through sections where laurel had grown so thick I had to crouch and push my way through. Deeper I went, the more cut off it felt like the forest was folding in behind me. 4 miles in the path started to climb. Not steep, but enough to burn the legs. I followed the ridge until it curved west. And that's when I saw it. A cabin. I stopped in my tracks, just stared at it. It wasn't hidden, exactly, just positioned in a way that you'd never notice unless you hit that exact bend. From the wrong angle, it had blended right into the tree line. It wasn't a ruin, not freshly built either, just old but solid. The logs were thick and gray, fit together, with a kind of care that said someone had meant it to last. Moss grew in the seams, but not in a way that looked like decay. More like the cabin and the forest had come to some sort of agreement. The stovepipe leaned slightly to one side, like it had gotten tired over the years. The porch sagged in the middle, but the planks didn't look rotten. It felt like the kind of place that had been standing for a long time, unbothered and mostly forgotten. I looked around. No tire marks, no boot prints, no litter, just dead leaves and silence. I called out once, nothing, not even an echo. It was like my voice didn't carry. I know how it sounds, but I didn't plan to go inside. I was just curious. The kind of quiet curiosity that creeps in when something's just out of place. The door wasn't locked. I touched the handle gently, and it swung inward without resistance, like it had been left ajar for me specifically. The inside was sparse. A cot in one corner, no sheets, no pillow, just a frame, and a thin mattress. A cast-iron stove sat near the far wall on a flat slab of stone. There was a table hand cut from rough boards and a single chair. And on the table, a chipped blue enamel mug. That was the only real sign of use. And oddly, no dust. The place looked untouched, but somehow not abandoned. I took a few pictures, just quick snapshots. Not hanging artsy. One of the cot, one of the stove, one of the table, with the mug. I was halfway back to the door when I stopped. There were two mugs. The second one was white bone white, sitting right next to the blue one like it had always been there. But I know what I saw. I know how I take photos. I scan, then shoot. And there was only one mug when I looked. I stared at it for what felt like a long time, trying to force my memory to rewrite itself, but it wouldn't. That's when I heard it. A creak. Not a footstep, just one slow shift of weight on a floorboard from behind the back wall. I didn't call out this time. I just backed out, careful, quiet, like I thought something might be listening for sudden movement. I made it back to the trail and started walking, not running. Running felt like it would make noise. I just walked steady, trying to stay calm, trying not to let my brain spiral. About half a mile down, I froze again, my pack gone. I had left it on the porch, leaned it against the railing before I went inside. It wasn't on my shoulders. I wasn't carrying it. And that pack had everything. Phone wallet, food, water, car keys. Without it, I was stuck out there. I stood for a moment, just breathing through clenched teeth. Then I turned around. The cabin looked different when I came back into view. Not dramatically, just wrong in a subtle way. The door was open wider than before, just a little more ajar. The inside looked darker, less welcoming. My pack was gone. I called out again, forcing my voice to stay level, like I was talking to a stranger on a trail, not accusing, just making contact. That's when I heard the voice, not from inside the cabin, from behind it. I couldn't understand the words, if they were even words. It had a pattern like speech, slowed down or distorted, not hostile, not friendly, just patient, waiting. I stepped back 2 paces, then another, and there it was. My pack right in the center of the trail, zipped up clean, like it had been gently placed there. It wasn't there a moment ago. I crouched, hands trembling now, and opened it. Everything was there, neatly packed, except the camera. I dug until I found it, turned it on. All the photos from earlier were still there, except the 3 from the cabin, gone, not corrupted, not missing thumbnails, just not there. Like those moments had been plucked clean out of time. Then I noticed the clock. It was nearly 6:00. I checked my phone, same thing. Checked my watch. Matched exactly. I had started hiking at 10 that morning. I know my pace. The whole loop, even bushwhacking, should have taken 5, maybe 6 hours tops. But I'd somehow lost almost 8. I walked out without stopping again. I didn't run. I didn't want to draw attention, but I also didn't look back. When I reached my car, I got in and locked the doors before starting the engine. My hands were white-knuckled the whole drive back. I didn't unpack. I left the gear in the trunk and just sat on my couch that night. Lights on, music playing, trying not to think. Music. I was 22 when I agreed to watch Romy. Her parents had rented this cabin deep in the Appalachian woods, really secluded, like 2 hours from the nearest town, and that town was little more than a gas station with a payphone. They were off to a corporate retreat filled with awkward icebreakers, matching T-shirts, and trust falls. All I had to do was spend one night with their daughter, Ramy. They offered $200 food already in the fridge, no pets. I said yes before I even thought it through. Driving there was eerie from the start. The gravel road twisted through thick trees, then hacked up the side of a ridge. Then I hit a private dirt path so narrow the branches scraped against my car. The whole time I felt like I was winding into a memory I couldn't leave. When I finally pulled up, they were on the porch, bright and casual, like they'd done this 100 times before. They handed me a hand-drawn map. Just in case the GPS flaked out, they said. I laughed, but I pocketed the map anyway. They showed me the gas stove knob not to touch, confirmed Romy had brushed her teeth, and said she'd probably draw all night. "She's easy," her mom said. Then their SUV backed down the driveway and disappeared into the dark. Left on the porch, I stood there blinking into the dusk, the door in my hand, listening to their car engine fade. Then, nothing, just me, and a silence thick enough to chew. Inside, I found Rami cross-legged on the rug coloring with focus I didn't even have at 22. "Want anything snack water, TV?" I asked. She shook her head, didn't look up, then quiet as the forest. "You hear them walking yet?" I blinked. "Who?" She barely paused. "The people outside." I stared. "There's nobody out there." But she didn't argue. She just flipped the page and kept coloring. I thought, okay, weird kid, movie quote maybe. I shrugged and let it drop. At 9:00, I walked her upstairs to the bedroom at the end of the hall. She climbed in wordlessly. No nightlight, no bedtime story, just knees tucked up staring at the ceiling, waiting. "They knock first," she said. I stood in the doorway. Who knocks they don't like when people don't answer? "Okay," I forced a smile. "Good night." Back downstairs, I found the fireplace next to a small TV and DVD player. No Wi-Fi. Perfect. I curled on the couch and tried to focus on the articles I saved for a rainy day, but I couldn't. The house spoke in creaks and cracks, unexpected and loud, like it knew I was listening. At 10:12, I heard slow footsteps outside the back door. 3 deliberate steps, then silence. I muted my phone, heart ticking faster, no wind, no rustling leaves. I turned on the porch light. The yard glowed pale yellow. Nothing moved, no heads peeking, no shadows skidding across the deck. Still, I locked the door twice and pulled the curtain closed. Then upstairs a soft shift, not falling, more like someone leaned too far. Rami's voice floated down. "Are they inside now?" I swallowed. Went upstairs fast. She sat up in bed, knees to chest, staring at the wall. "I didn't open anything," I said softly. "They don't wait forever," she stated. "Go to sleep, Romy." I went back downstairs and hugged my blanket as if it could shield me. I set the flashlight and a kitchen knife on the floor beside me. Useless, I know, but I needed something. At 11:48, I heard clicking soft fingernail dragging against wood, first from the left, then the right. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. Heart in my throat. I flipped the curtain. Bare footprints in the dust outside, faint skinny ones and wider ones mixed together, circling the cabin. No shoes, no boots. I locked the front door again and closed every curtain, every light off. Then I headed upstairs. Her bedroom door stood open. Rami stood at the window again. "They're at the trees now," she said. "They get closer when someone's scared." "Step away from the window," I told her quietly. I shut the curtains. Carried her downstairs, my heart banging so loud I thought she heard it, set her on the couch, turned on every light again. We sat in silence. Then at 12:41 everything went black, just snapped off. No fizz, no flicker. The whole cabin swallowed in darkness. My phone showed no signal, no bars, no service. She didn't say a word. I got up and did a full perimeter check. Doors locked, no windows open, but the air had shifted, denser, settled around us like a curtain pulled closed. At 2:37 someone knocked. 3 sharp, deliberate thumps. I froze, didn't move. It didn't knock again. I turned to Romy. The couch was empty. My skin went ice cold. I bolted upstairs. She stood in the back room barefoot at the window. "They're waiting," she whispered. I grabbed her, slammed the door, shoved a chair under the handle, shoved her into the coat closet near the kitchen. We stayed there. Darkness, silence, my breathing loud enough to scare myself. We didn't say a word. I didn't blink. She just pressed into the coat rack, arms wrapped around her knees. At 6:23 a.m., the lights flickered on like nothing happened. At 6:40, the parents pulled up smiling and chirping like Sunday errands. "Everything okay?" her mom asked. I didn't answer. I walked past, got in my car, and drove until I hit the first gas station with cell service. I was 17 when I agreed to look after my uncle's place out in the Appalachians. He'd lined up a trip to Arizona, something about desert air and a high school buddy he hadn't seen since the 8s, and asked if I could stay at his cabin for a few nights while he was gone. He always called it the camp, which sounded a little more rugged and nostalgic than it really was. What it actually looked like was a wooden box someone had forgotten to finish. Just 2 rooms, a slanted roof, and a small porch that tilted a little to the left, like it was too tired to stand up straight anymore. It sat halfway up a wooded slope surrounded by trees that looked like they'd been leaning in for years, like they were trying to take the place back. The nearest town with a gas station was about 2 hours away more if it rained. He built the place in the 70s with his brother, though you wouldn't guess it had ever been a 2-person job. They never finished the foundation, just plopped the cabin on a few stone footers and called it good. Everything creaked, everything leaned. The floor had a slight tilt that made you feel like you were walking uphill no matter which direction you went. There was no plumbing, no reception. The stove ran off a propane tank, and for light, there was a generator you had to yank 3 times in just the right rhythm to get it sputtering. Even when it worked, most of the bulbs in the place were either dead or so dim they looked like they were trying to retire. Then there was Sadie. She was his dog, sort of an old mutt who'd spent more time at that cabin than most people I knew had spent in their own homes. Half shepherd, half something scrappy and uncertain. Her job, supposedly, was to keep away the coyotes. But she was so slow-moving and mellow, I wasn't convinced she'd even lift her head if one showed up on the porch. She had this sigh, deep and dramatic, like a very movement. Cost her 1 more day of life. I figured I'd stay 4 or 5 nights, no more. It was summer. School was out, and I wasn't doing much anyway. I liked the idea of getting away. Maybe I'd get some writing done. Maybe I'd finally finish a few pages in that sketch pad I always carried but never really used. I packed a duffel with the essentials: clothes, a flashlight, a notebook, some pens, a bag of trail mix I'd regret by the second day, and enough instant mac and cheese to get scurvy. The first night was fine, peaceful even. I made a small fire in the old hearth-cooked dinner on the rusty stovetop and sat on the floor while Sadie stretched out like a rug and snored. The kind of snore that starts in the lungs and ends in the floorboards. It felt weirdly comforting, like background noise from a movie you weren't watching. By midnight, I was lying on the cot in the back room, trying to decide if the ceiling was sloped or if my head was just tilted funny. The air was cold in a way that felt old, like the kind of cold that's been sitting in the walls for years. I woke up a few hours later with no idea why. My heart was pounding, not just racing, but pounding like I'd been running in my sleep. I didn't hear anything, but my body was telling me someone was there. Right there, standing just past the wall in the main room. Not moving, not speaking, just there. I grabbed my flashlight and hit the button. It flickered once, then steadied. I swept the beam across the room. Sadie was awake. She wasn't barking. She wasn't growling. Just staring at the door with her ears up and her body tense, like every muscle was waiting for something to happen. Her eyes didn't move. She didn't blink. She was locked in like she saw something I couldn't. I sat up, waited. Nothing happened. No knock, no creak, just silence. I didn't sleep again that night. The next day everything felt heavy. The quiet outside wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt off, like the forest had gone into hiding. I chopped wood, though there was already more than enough stacked under the porch. I hiked up the trail behind the cabin, tried to distract myself. From the ridge I looked down into a gully full of thorny brush and trees that looked dead, even though they weren't. I didn't hear birds, didn't see squirrels, even the bugs were quiet. I told myself it was just the time of day or maybe the altitude, but I didn't really believe it. That night I checked the locks twice. Not that it mattered. The door had a flimsy metal slide, more rust than mechanism. The windows didn't even have proper latches, just these little wooden pegs you could wedge into place. Sadie curled up by the door again. This time I didn't even try to sleep. At 1:40 a.m. on the dot I heard it. 3 knocks. Not on the door on the back wall, the one with nothing behind it, but dirt and trees. No porch, no steps, no reason for anyone to be there. I sat bolt upright. Sadi let out a low rumbling growl. Not angry, more like a warning, the kind of sound a dog makes when it knows you're about to see something you'll wish you hadn't. I waited. Nothing else came. No voice, no footsteps. Just those 3 slow, deliberate knocks, almost polite. I stayed like that until the sun came up. My flashlight stayed on the whole time, the beam burning a pale spot on the opposite wall. Sadi never took her eyes off the door. In the morning, I walked around to the back wall. Nothing. The soil was packed too tight for tracks. No scuffs, no scratches. Nothing to even prove I'd heard anything. I nearly convinced myself I'd imagined it until later that afternoon. That's when I saw it. A circle 15 feet from the cabin near the edge of the trees. Perfectly round 6 feet across, just bare. No leaves, no moss, no sign of anything alive. Just clean scraped dirt like something had spun or pressed into the ground until it wore the forest away. No prints around it, no drag marks, just the circle. I didn't step near it. I just stood there and stared while something in my stomach sank like a stone. It wasn't just strange, it was wrong. Like the ground itself had been marked. That night, I made a choice, no sleeping. I turned off the generator before midnight. No more noise. I sat by the window with my flashlight off and waited, watching the outline of the trees under a thin slice of moon. Sadi didn't move from her spot near the hearth. Her eyes stayed on the window. No blinking, no shift. At 2:13 a.m., I heard it again. Movement. Soft, slow steps in the pine needles outside. Not stumbling, not hurried, just careful, like someone trying not to wake the house. It circled the cabin once, twice, then silence. Then the door orc knob rattled. Just a gentle test, like someone had never used one before and was curious what it did. Sadi didn't move. Her ears twitched, but her body stayed frozen. So did mine. After a while, the noise stopped. In the morning, I walked outside and saw it. A footprint near the generator shed in softer soil. It wasn't right. 2 long, 2 wide toes, uneven, spread out like they didn't belong on a human foot. The heel had pressed in deep, like something heavy had stood there and shifted once. It was barefoot, but not human. I didn't think. I just packed. I left a note for my uncle, said the generator was being weird, and that I'd heard some animals at night. Promised I'd swing back in a week. I loaded the last of my stuff into the truck. And when I turned to look at the cabin one last time, I saw it. 3 lines carved into the wooden door, straight parallel, deep enough to expose fresh pale wood beneath the surface. Not claw marks, too. Even they looked intentional, like someone wanted me to see them before I left. I got in the truck. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, hand on the key, staring out at the trees like they were waiting for something. Then I turned the key. I drove until I hit pavement. Didn't stop, didn't look back, and I never went back. My shift at Mel's ended at 5, but I didn't head home right away. Instead, I cut through the gravel lot out back and slipped behind the tree line next to that old utility shed. Half-collapsed thing covered in ivy just sitting there, like it forgot it used to matter. Back behind it, in that little clearing, Caleb and Wes were already waiting. They had this old Laura's map, printed from someone's Tumblr post. No street names, no labels, just a satellite shot of the ridge above town and a black square off to the side. No one knew what it was. No roads led to it. Wes said it was an abandoned ranger cabin. Caleb claimed the ranger who lived there just vanished one day. Personally, I thought they were full of it, but I wasn't going to correct them. Not because I believed the map, but because I hadn't wanted to go home in a while, and this felt like something else, something better than silence. We started walking, cutting through woods that got darker faster than they should have. We crossed 3 narrow deer trails, barely more than trampled grass. Then an old creek that had dried up long before I ever worked at Mel's. There was a stretch of broken barbed wire sagging low enough to duck under without ripping your jacket. None of us talked much past that point. You'd think we would have joked or argued or something, but the deeper we got, the quieter everything around us got to, like the trees were pressing in closer. The air felt heavier, not colder, not humid, just thick, like breathing through a wool sleeve. I kept glancing over my shoulder, not because I thought we were being followed, but because every step felt a little too soft, like the ground was padded. I carried the flashlight, only one that worked. The others brought theirs, but of course they either forgot batteries or packed ones that were half dead. I remember feeling weirdly responsible, like it was my job to keep the beam steady, even when my hands were getting clammy. Caleb saw the roof first. You couldn't even call it a cabin from a distance. Just a patch of dark shingles caved in under a mess of dead branches. Looked more like a ruined shed than a building anyone could have lived in. If he hadn't pointed it out, I think we might have walked right past it. We made a slow loop around it. There weren't any windows, just that sagging roof and planks nailed to the sides like someone tried to fortify it. Eventually, we found the door not warped, but crooked, like it had been kicked in and patched back together by someone who didn't care how it looked. Caleb pulled it open, and the thing swung wider than I expected. The air inside hit me before I even stepped in. Not musty, not moldy, just still unmoving. No furniture, one rusted metal bucket in the corner, and a weird fan-shaped pattern made of sticks on the floor. The walls were bare, but someone had hammered mismatched planks over a slit in the back, like a window that never belonged there in the first place. The boards overlapped unevenly, almost like someone was trying to keep something out or in. The floor didn't creak. Even when we walked all the way in, it was solid, which somehow made it creepier. Old buildings are supposed to give under your feet. This one felt like it had been drained of sound. Wes laughed a little and said, "Looks like someone tried to turn a root cellar into a hunting lodge." That's when we noticed it. A hatch dead center of the floor, perfect square, no handle, no lock, just a bent loop of wire hammered into one side. You wouldn't have spotted it unless you were looking. I crouched and ran the flashlight over the seam. There was this black stuff, sealing it. Looked like tar, but dry and chipped around the edges. Whoever sealed it had meant for it to stay closed. Before I could say anything, Caleb reached down and yanked it open. There was no ladder, no rungs, just a square hole pitch black. The light didn't reach far. The shaft looked smooth, too smooth, like the inside of a chimney that had been polished. The beam just stopped a few feet down, not faded, stopped like the darkness swallowed it whole. Wes leaned over it and spat. We waited. Nothing. No sound, not even a faint splash. Just nothing. "That's not right," he muttered. Caleb stood up slower this time. He wasn't grinning anymore. None of us were. There was something about the way the air pressed down through that opening, like the space below wasn't empty but filled with something dense, silent waiting. Wes crouched down again. I thought he was going to spit a second time, but he just leaned close, like he was listening. Then my flashlight went dead. 1 second I'm lighting the hatch, the next it's pitch black. I smacked it against my palm, against the floor. Nothing. Wes's voice broke the silence. "There's someone down there. Not scared, not confused, just certain." We stood there frozen, trying to breathe, like that would help us hear better. Then Caleb called out, "Hello." We waited, and then we heard it knock. Just one, not from the trees, not from the roof, from below directly under the hatch. That sound hit me in the chest like it knew exactly where we were. Caleb slammed the hatch shut hard enough to make the floor shudder. I didn't even realize I was backing away until my hand hit the door frame. Wes hadn't moved. He was still staring at the hatch like it was about to open again. We stepped outside, and the second we did, the flashlight blinked back on. Worked perfectly. No flickers, no delay. I checked the batteries, nothing wrong. No one said a word for the next 20 minutes. We crossed the barbed wire again, then the creek, then the last trail. When we got to the gravel lot, Wes peeled off without saying goodbye, just turned and walked. That night he left our group chat. Neva messaged again. Caleb stopped posting anything the week after. I kept going back to the photos I took before the hatch opened. I was sure I had a few from when Wes was kneeling by the hole, and I did. One photo showed him down on one knee, flashlight angled down, but in the corner of the frame, just barely visible in the light, there was a hand, long fingers, pale skin. The palm was up resting against the inside edge of the hatch, not reaching, just waiting. I didn't take that photo. I know exactly where I aimed my phone. That wasn't it. I deleted the rest, but I couldn't delete that one. We never talked about going back. But a couple months later, I saw Caleb outside the Gray Line station downtown, just pacing in slow circles. He looked rough pale, like he hadn't eaten in days. When he finally saw me, he looked like he didn't recognize me at first. He said he couldn't stop dreaming about the hatch, said it was open in his dreams that someone was calling his name from below. I haven't seen him since. I haven't stepped foot in those woods again either.